All right, folks. Thank you again for joining us. Yolo Audubon is pleased tonight to have Joe Hobbs, the manager of the Yolo Bypass wildlife area. Before we get started, I would like to remind you to. I think the whole presentation works better if you turn off your video and mute yourself. Especially if your personal Wi-Fi or internet connection is not as strong, it will help you. And so we were going to ask you to write any questions you have in the chat feature. It's in the menu bar down at the bottom of the screen. And Zane Pickus, one of our board members, will be monitoring the chat, and at the end of the presentation, we will have a question and answer period. And Zane will read the questions for Joe to answer. And there are no dumb questions. You know, if you come up with some sort of question, just write it down, and we'll get to it. Next month, we're going to try our first, obviously, virtual meeting of members' memories. I'm working on a set of procedures for the process that I will publish in a Yolo Audubon Facebook page and on the website. But basically, anyone who wants to participate needs to send me up to 5 photographs or drawings. And I will take those pictures and drawings and prepare a PowerPoint, a slideshow. That way, the individuals do not have to worry about sharing screens or that sort of thing. And so if you have a drawing, please digitize it and you'll send that to me. Information, my email address and everything will be there. And also prepare a short story to go along with your illustrations. And when you come down to you on the list, then you can speak and tell your story, or if you prefer not to, or you're not all that comfortable with Zoom. If I have, if you send me your written story, then I can read it for you. So that's all up to you. You let me know when you send it and how you want, if you want to speak or you want me to read it for you. And we're going to limit it to, up to 10 minutes because everybody speaks at different speeds. But in order to get as many people in, that's what we sort of have to do and have to be strict about the 10 minutes. And so that's basically it. And I will have other information like where to send things and that sort of thing later on. I'm working on it now. I haven't worked on a draft. So, and if you have any questions, you can email me, and my email address is on the Yolo Audubon website under About Us. I think it's called About Us, and it has the board roster there. If you have any questions, email me your questions, and I'll do my best to answer them clearly and so that you understand what we're expecting for this program. And the theme is going to be birding during 2020 during the COVID shelter in place. Your innovative ways to bird safely and respectful of the rules we had to follow. Me personally, I birded in the backyard. So I did more eBird lists this year than ever for my yard. And taking photographs, that sort of thing. So if I were to participate, that's what you would see. So something like that. Depending on how many people we have, mostly I'm looking for folks who have January and December. Just recently though, when things are opening up, some people are doing some traveling. They probably traveled last time to places where they didn't have to see folks and that sort of thing. So yeah, whatever you were able to do during that times. So that's kind of what it's going to look like. And I will have my email address later on. And I mean, I will have my email address in the information that I put out. Okay. All righty. So let's. I think we're ready.
Okay.
If anybody has any questions, again, and use the chat feature. So we have Joe Hobbs tonight, manager of the Yolo Bypass walleye area. Joe has been he's been with the Department of Fish and Wildlife for over 21 years, and he's been out there at Yolo Bypass for about 3 years. He's worked with elk for Fish and Wildlife and pronghorn. Oh, that was a pretty cool job. He's worked for departments of wetland programs, timber harvest, and private lands management. He's got a bachelor's and a master's degree from Cal State, Sacramento. And excuse me. And the thing about it is his master's was on the Thule greater white-fronted goose. I don't know if we get much Thule goose here, but in the Sacramento Valley. And so that's great, because that's one of the birds that we get lots of here. And I find it pleased that as before, we have a manager out there who has a training and experience in wildlife. And I say that because I did a seasonal aid job for Fish and Wildlife down at the Salton Sea, and a manager down there was more into the farming and land management aspects of the area, and wasn't a didn't have a background in wildlife. So this job you take a lot of experience to come and do this job and do a great job. So anyway, that's about our speaker, Joe, and I'll turn it over to him, and we're going to hear about what's going on out there for 2021 at our beloved Yolo Basin Wildlife Foundation. I'm sorry, I volunteer a lot for Yolo Basin Foundation, and so I'm always saying Yolo Basin Wildlife area. I'm not sorry about that. Just call it the bypass. Anyway, thank you, Joe. The floor/screen is all yours.
Okay, I'll see if I can share my screen here.
All righty.
Let's see.
I'm gonna cool my video and get out of your way.
Did that come up, Ken, for everybody to see?
Yes, it did.
Okay, so again, thank you, Ken, very much. Ken kind of gave my my intro there. So my name is Joe Hobbs. I've been the area manager here at the Yolo Bypass Wildlife Area for just over 3 years. I've been with the department 21 years as a permanent employee. I also went through undergrad and graduate school as a scientific aide in the big game program, and then the WHR, the Wildlife Habitat Relationship Program, downtown Sacramento. So I have about 6 years as seasonal time as well. I worked for Ducks Unlimited for 3 years doing wetland restoration and enhancement. So it's funny because prior to coming in here, I had 13 years working in the elk and antelope program, and a lot of people like, what's Joe's background to do wetland management? Well, prior to doing that, I worked in the wetland program. My master's is on Thule greater white-fronted goose distribution. Worked for Ducks Unlimited, did work for private lands, doing restoration and enhancement. So I got a pretty diverse background in general wildlife management, with a lot of focus on wetlands and waterfowl. So I'll just kind of go through this, give you an overview of the wildlife area itself. Some of you may have seen some of this information before, and kind of a brief overview of some of the stuff we have coming up as well. So Yolo Bypass Wildlife Area is in our Bay Delta region, or our Region 3. So there are 6 land regions within the department and 1 coastal region. So it's total, we have 7 regions. So there's we're in the kind of far eastern corner of our region. In fact, we used to be in Region 2. There's still a screen shop, on right behind the headquarters that is part of Region 2. So the other large staffed wildlife area in our region is Grizzly Island Wildlife Area, which is about just under an hour west towards San Francisco off of I-80. We have several other, smaller wildlife areas, mostly unstaffed. So the Yolo Basin is a natural basin at the north edge of the Sacramento Delta, approximately 80,000 acres. So the wildlife area first opened in 1997, and I think it was around 3,200 acres. And then later in 2001, that actually I got to move some stuff around so I can see better. The wildlife area was expanded. The Wildlife Conservation Board purchased another 12,000 acres consisting of several ranches and properties. So the total acreage of the wildlife area now is just under 17,000 acres. It's just approximately 22 square miles. One thing as always I tell people is the staffing level is pretty much the same as it is now as it was when it was 3,400 acres. I think they have one additional temporary employee that was added during that time period. And I also say that most of the equipment that we have now is part of the original wildlife area, and it was bought used when we got it. Let's see here. Okay. So general information on the wildlife area. We have a front gate that the levee is controlled by the Department of Water Resources, or DWR. So that gate is open and closed, locked at sunrise and sunset every day except for Christmas. There is a 5-mile auto tour for viewing wildlife, and there are several short walking trails or hiking trails. On the auto tour, there are no bikes, horses, or dogs. We do have a place on the North Causeway that you can take bikes or dogs, but the majority of the wildlife area is not open for dogs. So some of the main uses we have are hunting. That most of that is waterfowl and pheasant and dove. The other activity that we have a lot of is fishing. So each year there are about 4,000 students that go through the Yolo Basin Foundation's education program, and about 8,000 hunters per year. So again, we have hunting and fishing. It's my joke fish. Obviously, we don't have rooster fish on the wildlife area. So the other portion of the use of the wildlife area is wildlife viewing and nature studies. So we get, daily use, all throughout the year, not just during the fall and the winter, for people to come out, enjoy wildlife, enjoy nature in various different activities. So the Yolo Basin Foundation, the nonprofit or foundation, basically right there next to the wildlife area's headquarters, is responsible for the education and outreach, on the wildlife area itself. So I have to move some stuff around. So they work with students, they learn about wetlands, and then they learn about wildlife. And they do a really good job. Prior to this last year, every day seems like for a portion of the year, a busload of children would show up outside my office door, really excited to go learn about wetlands and wildlife. And it's funny because they'll be playing outside, having lunch prior to entering, and look over and then see somebody in the office, actually sitting there at their computer, which is majority of my job is sitting at my computer, figuring out how to pay all the bills. So they're always kind of shocked to sit back a little bit. So on the wildlife area, we have wildlife friendly agriculture. So we're kind of unique in this. Many other wildlife areas don't have active agriculture on their wildlife area as part of it. So the value of those leases, which is used to pay a lot of our operating costs, is over $700,000 per year. So we have 3 5-year leases, 2 of which are grazing. We have a big grazing in the south portion of the wildlife area and a smaller grazing in the Causeway unit. And then we have the rice operation in the north that everybody's pretty familiar with. So we work with the Yolo Resource Conservation District. We have a contract with them to help us manage those agricultural leases. So they kind of act as a middle person. They go in between, they help organize the meetings, help, basically communicate back and forth, make sure everything's going according to the lease. We do monthly inspections. We meet several times a year with the lessees, and it's all, basically organized by the RCD. So again, like I mentioned, those funds, the $700,000 is portion of what we use to operate and maintain the wildlife area. Those monies are basically allocated through a federal U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service grant. It's the Pittman-Robertson Act grant, or we call it PR grant. And that's basically an excise tax on sporting arms and ammunition. So that's matched 3-to-1, I believe, from federal dollars. So the other thing, I was talking to Ken about this earlier, is a lot of the wildlife restoration and enhancement projects, on Yolo and many other wildlife areas are paid for with duck stamp monies. So, and you can purchase a duck stamp. You don't have to be a hunter. Those funds are allocated for wetland projects or waterfowl projects, every single year across the state. So that's one good way to help contribute to the funding of the wildlife areas. So the rice, there's about 2,000 acres of rice on the wildlife area. A portion of this is going to be in wild rice, and a portion of it's going to be in white rice. So as part of the agricultural lease for rice, they are obligated to flood 2 fields each year for about 30 days each period for shorebirds. So they'll take a portion of rice out of agricultural production and put water on it, shallow water, for about 30 days on one pond, draw that water down, and then start another pond. So it's generally in July and August when those shorebird ponds are flooded up. And they'll rotate them throughout the year, or throughout years. So not every year will they be in the same area. Like last year, we changed some of the shorebird fields just because we were doing some of the big projects, and we needed the fields next to those projects to be dry for at least a portion of the project activities. So you see, we get a lot of different shorebirds that come in and use those fields early on when they're flooded up. Not only shorebirds, these are some gulls that utilize those activity or those fields as well. So not only, does wildlife use the flooded rice fields in the summer, but during the whole entire rice production season, when they start flooding them up, we have lots of ibis in there and other waterfowl and birds that come in and utilize the rice. So ducks will get in there. Again, ibis is one of the big ones that we see. Geese get in there as well and utilize that. They'll have their broods and use that for brood water sometimes. So again, I mentioned there's 2 different kinds of rice on the wildlife area. There's white rice, which is harvested dry, which you see here, and wild rice. So the wild rice is a 90-day crop, which basically has a shorter growing season. It's more suited to the bypass. We have cooler nights with the delta breeze, and many times due to flooding activities, they can't even get up until a little bit later. So their growing window is shortened, and wild rice, can be planted in immature. So one of the differences between white rice and wild rice is traditionally harvested while it's still wet. They'll take their harvesters out there, and this stops or prevents a lot of the shattering of the seed as it dries out. So it's still damp, and they get the machinery in there. And you can see right after the harvester goes through, it's heavily utilized by wildlife. You have egrets here and ibis coming in to feed right behind the harvester. So when the rice farmer is done, they've harvested the rice. Sometimes they'll work over the field, disc it in, or even plane it, or just mow it, and sometimes not even that. And then we'll flood that up, usually around November, December, depending on exactly when they were done with all their activities. And then at the end, those fields have a huge amount of waste grain left over in them that's utilized by wintering waterfowl that's just arriving on their migration. So you can see the end results here, that some of these fields, just see them stacked with waterfowl. So for our grazing, there's about 5,000 acres of pasture. Some of that's irrigated and some of it's dry land. And you'll see that geese on the pasture lands, and again, I've only been here for 3 years, but this last year, the number of snow geese actually on the wildlife area, late winter, early spring, was just phenomenal. I mean, they went into all the pastures because it's got new growth coming in after it was grazed, and just really fed those fields heavily. My grazer is not overly thrilled about that, but it is a wildlife area, and that's just part of the deal that you get. But we just saw tremendous use of snow geese and also white fronts. White fronts, not as big as numbers as the snow geese in flocks, but they stayed around longer, and they finally look like they're starting to leave this last week, at least in better numbers. So there's multiple benefits from grazing. It gives you, again, that new growth that the geese are going to use in the late winter and spring. And also on our vernal pools, it keeps the non-native species at bay, allowing the vernal pool species to flourish like you see in some of these upcoming pictures here. Not being a plant person, I cannot name most of those species. But you see these, plants are there because of the continued grazing, on those first section of the year. So we are working on better identifying and marking our hiking trails. This is an older map. I've been working with the Yolo Basin Foundation staff. We went back and forth with several iterations on the new trails. I sent that back to Sacramento to try to finalize that map a couple weeks ago. So hopefully by the end of this month, we'll have new map, and then we can put up the hiking trails and get on top of maintaining those trails so they can be used by the general public. So one of the things that's also unique about this wildlife area is, first and foremost, it is a flood control. Water is bypassed around Sacramento to keep Sacramento from flooding, and it is channeled right through the middle of the wildlife area. Second, we're unique that we have active agriculture on the wildlife area. We also have wildlife, habitat, and a tremendous amount of public use. I think we're probably one of the more highly used wildlife areas in the state. We're right between Sacramento and the Bay Area. You get a lot of people just outside of Davis. So you get lots of use. And what this last year with the pandemic and everything, that use is probably at least over doubled. Many of the people that have not been out there before did not know exactly, let's just call it the rules and regulations, and we're doing things that typically would not be done. So there was a lot of, education, trying to talk to people. Most people get it once they find out, hey, I'm not supposed to do donuts in parking lot A, okay, didn't know. And then I see them doing it again the next day. But it's been a heavy use over the last 12 months for sure. So wetland management, in my words, is basically water management. This is a heavily manipulated system from the dams, at Shasta and Folsom. So the water, it just doesn't, it's not pounded because of rain. When we do flood wall to wall, that's man-made, and anything that we flood up is flood up by low lift pumps and high line ditches. So we're trying to move water around and where we think it would do best. We have beavers, which may not always agree on how we do water management, and they show us how they would do water management, which may not be conducive to some of our other activities. So it's a constant back and forth with the beavers, who actually work harder than any employee I've ever had. We can pull out a beaver dam with a backhoe, at 3 o'clock on a Tuesday, and Wednesday morning, the thing is back and bigger than it was before. So I don't think they're in the union, they don't take breaks, and they just work really hard. Like I mentioned, it's a very altered environment. It does not flood due to natural events. Again, the rivers are dammed and everything's manipulated behind that. So our water control, again, is completely, man-made, if you will, through water control systems, pumps, ditches, water control structures. So we were basically managing the water for food and cover for the wildlife. So again, I talked about some of these. We have swales, which are basically depressions that go through the middle of ponds. They're usually or always start at the entrance where the water comes in on the high side, and they'll meander through the unit or the field and go out the drain on the low side. What this does is allow us, when we're flooding a field up, we can put water in those swales, get it all the way from one end to the other, hold it there, to provide water for wildlife during the time of the season, and then increase the flow and pump that water up onto the benches and either continue to flood it or draw it back down. That's basically an irrigation, just like you would in a farm field for some of the moist soil plants. So when we draw the water down, it's the same thing. It comes off the benches into the swales and out. And it's those drawdowns in March to mid-April that the vegetation coming in behind that, as the soil temperatures and the moisture levels reach certain species such as swamp timothy, watergrass, or smartweed that grow during the summer, the spring and summer, and make seed. And that seed that's flooded up the following year or following fall is what is used by wintering waterfowl. There's a huge pound per acre, I can't remember off the top of my head, depending on the species, swamp timothy, watergrass, or smartweed, that provide food for wintering waterfowl as far as a seed source. There's also invertebrates and other stuff that they'll get in there, but that is probably the number one thing we do when we manage seasonal wetlands, is to provide food for the following winter. So again, we have pump stations that have to be elevated because the bypass can flood, 15 plus feet. Discharge pipes, all different types of water control structures, such as these screw gates here. The other thing that we have, is we have listed species that utilize the wildlife area, special status species, snowy plover, Swainson's hawk, giant garter snake, fairy shrimp. We have, I believe it's a pair of bald eagles now that started nesting on us this year. So that's new. And so when the bypass does flood due to man-made activities, it can flood levee to levee, 15 feet deep, going across the wildlife area. This creates its own set, of management issues, not so much the time that it's flooding. Right when it starts and right when it's drawing down is when it really does the most damage, as it's scouring across certain low areas, basically damaging roads, infrastructure, moving gravel around, things like that. So road maintenance, when it's not flooded, is an all year activity. We have, again, like I mentioned, high visitor use, heavy farm equipment, people driving on it all year. All that takes its toll on our road system, not to mention the flooding in the water. So as soon as you add water on a road and put any type of vehicle traffic on it, that road is going to get degraded. And again, the flooding, it's usually like these low situations, not when it's 15 feet deep, when water is just scouring the low areas, that it really will rip through roads. When it's deeper, it's not as bad because most of the flows seem to be not causing nearly the damage that these lower flows can do. We see here some examples of the road issues from water levels, going across, or wind waves when the water level's higher than it should be. Again, farm heavy equipment, these farm trucks, we have heavy equipment, all take its time or damage on the road system. So the main wetland habitat that we manage for is shallow water or seasonal wetlands habitat. So these are used by waterfowl, ducks, geese, shorebirds, wading birds. These are the predominant acres that we have. We do have some riparian and some permanent wetlands, but the majority of our wetlands are seasonal shallow water habitat. And with that seasonal shallow water habitat comes mosquitoes, which can be a public nuisance and health threat. So we try to do our best management activities to minimize mosquitoes in the ponds. So we work with our local mosquito and vector control district, who are really good. We coordinate with them if we know we're going to be flooding up certain fields. They can pre-treat those fields with larvicide or monitor those fields to see if it does need control and adulticide. So the other question I get a lot of is, where does our water come from? So most of our water, probably over 95% of it, is surface water. So it's pushed by tidal influences in the tow drain from the south and the delta. It gets pushed behind Lisbon Weir, which is a structure in that tow drain. And it basically slows that water from going back out with the tides. And while it's trapped behind that weir for numerous miles, we have a series of low lift pumps that we can capture that water with those pumps, put it into highline ditches, and then put it out through gravity into the units that we're trying to flood up for the fall. Just reverse cycle when we're trying to do it in the winter or in the spring, was draining it, they go in the ditches back into the tow drain and out. So we do have a couple deep wells. We rarely use those. They are much more expensive to operate. So we try not to use them unless absolutely necessary. So those pumps are all electric. Pumping costs, my PG&E bills have gone up these last couple of years. So my pumping cost is about $300,000 each year on the wildlife area. So when people are asking, hey, should I turn down the air conditioner in the office a little bit? That's not what's going to break my budget. It's pumping wetlands to get the water out there. So as many of you saw, we had several large projects this last year, and we have some more coming up in the near future. So one of the neat projects that you may see that we started last year is a pollinator or upland habitat. So it's hard to see, and I got better maps, but the two areas that are crosshatched in here are units that were previously in rice and now are going to be pollinator habitat. So CWA, California Waterfowl Association, last year did the earthwork on those. They basically put swales in, some pond areas, and then tied them into the water control structure for the water delivery and drain. As soon as May comes around, they didn't have time. They ran out of time last year to put new water control structures in. So after May, we can do earthwork, and then they will put the new water control structures in. But they did plant those last fall, and they planted them with creeping wild rye, blue wild rye, and slender wheatgrass. And both those units are coming in pretty good. The western unit, which is right where you can go into the rice viewing circle, that's going to be to the north. That's really coming in good. And then in the spring, River Partners planted them with a series of rhizomes for different species. You see here, and so those are just planted. You know, unfortunately, it hasn't rained since they planted them, so we're just going to see how those come in. Once we start charging the ditches for the rice water, we may try an irrigation, you know, on those, put the water up on the benches and draw it down pretty quick so we don't drown anything out. But to see if we can't get some water to some of those new plantings. So again, it's kind of a little bit closer map to show you where those two units are. You know, one is right off the auto tour there, and one is much further to the east, just on the edge of us, edge of a wetland unit that was rice. So here's kind of the diagrams put together by the California Waterfowl Association that shows those units in the plans. And generally we follow these plans. So again, you see the blue, which is the swales, the low areas, and some deeper ponds, and then some higher benches as well. That's one of them. There's the one further to the east. So here you can see basically post-planting, either just starting to come in. You can see the fallows where the planter went through, no till. And then the further to the east, it actually ponded water much longer because of the water control surface is not completely operational. So you see that a lot of that water was impounded. We're seeing what kind of effect it had, you know, on the vegetation as it comes in. Looks much better now, and I'll have some pictures here in a second to show you. But now when you go out, you'll see, you know, it's pretty good coverage of the plants that they planted last fall. So that project's coming along pretty good, and we'll see how it goes, and hopefully the rhizomes that they planted will make it. Otherwise, we may end up having to do another planting, you know, on those. So the Ducks Unlimited project, which was a Prop 1 Delta Conservancy funding for last year, we did several phases of that. So you saw the two new bridges at the Y and at the rice corner there were put in. We cleaned out a major section of waterway, water control ditch as well. And then we put in a new pumping station to create some wetlands in the unit that's blue to the further south on this map. So these were called conspans. They were prefabricated bridges that they were installed. When it was described to me, when they said prefabricated bridges, I just imagined something that would be on the back of a semi. They would go in, just drop it in place, put some dirt around it, it would be good. They started digging a huge hole, put a huge cement pad on it, and the bridges were delivered in pieces. It was much more extensive than my little brain comprehended at first. You know, those are both in now. And one of the reasons was to put these in was the old road crossings with pipe underneath were constantly clogged with beavers, did not have the flow capacity to take water from the Davis train, which if you're looking from here is directly behind with those trees. That's looking at the western boundary of our wildlife area. And there's water that's pumped through the wildlife area from the outside that can impact us. The ditches and waterways can't handle some of that volume at certain times of the year. So it'll overflow, impacting both our management and the rice operation as well. So these are part of the operation to allow greater flow across the wildlife area and get the water out back into the tow drain with minimal impact on the wildlife area or the agricultural production. Again, another example of putting in the bridge. This is a pipeway. The pump station was moved across the road. This pump station floods several different fields on that corner. And it's one of the reasons we didn't flood those north areas up last year, is PG&E needed to come in and connect the new pumping station up with all the wildfire fires that they had across the state. They were heavily delayed. It went from, we were supposed to do it in September to October. It went really late in the year before they were able to finally get that pump completely hooked up electrically. So again, this is the ditchway before it was cleaned out. You see, again, beavers plugging in our piping system to put water where they want. One of the things too, we're working with the rice farmer, trying not to impact his operation. So we're able to clean a section of the ditch. We worked from basically towards the freeway south, but one of the intakes to his rice field is right past that excavator. And then he needed to get water to that as soon as he could. So we put a cofferdam, or the contractor put a cofferdam in there. We cleaned the rest of the ditch out. And now that ditch is clean, we can go back in and remove that cofferdam, which is what they're doing here. So you can see the Parker unit, it's not very highlighted here, but the area outlined in red is where a new pumping station was put in to flood up some areas and create new wetlands. So a big basin was excavated, a pumping station was put in, and so we can move water, and there's the basin, to some areas that are just off picture here. So what happened on this one is, so they got that pumping station in, it was connected. We started to operate it. There was pump issues throughout the winter. Then it started leaking along the pipe. So they had to come back in and fix that. And then when we went to operate the pump, long story short, pump blew up. It was wired incorrectly. And so literally just several weeks ago, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, that pumping station, the pump's back in, it's operational. Of course, now, it's too late to flood it up for this year. We may run that unit as a reverse cycle wetland, putting water out in the summer. We tested it by putting water in the swales. Seems like everything's functional now. So this next year, we'll be able to have some more wetlands in that portion of the wildlife area. Again, nothing surprises me. This happened last summer. I was going to check on the contractor progress, went down the road, car in the ditch. That's the first for me. It's happened that I haven't seen. Go up there, there's a handicap plate on it, cane in the door. So I'm looking, I have no idea how it's been 5 minutes or 5 hours. I can't see anybody in the car. Look around, somebody stops and said that lady drove in the ditch. She's out. She called a tow truck, and then they're coming out, but she was okay. So part of the future projects for Ducks Unlimited is part of the same grant. We don't think we are not gonna get those done in 2022. And that's along Greens Lake, cleaning that out, improving some of the drainage delivery ditches or drainage ditches north of that, and some cleaning out of ditches in other areas of the wildlife area. So that looks like we're going to be that in 2022. We do have one section of ditch that we can clean out this summer as soon as we have clearance for work past May 1st for giant garter snake. We can't really turn over the ditch soil and stuff like that until the giant garter snake work period. So this is, you can see to the left, parking lot B and parking lot C. So that ditch is in between rice fields. It actually ties in to the Davis drain, just north of just by the airstrip. So those two bridges in combination with this will help funnel water, safely across the wildlife area to get it out. So this last year, we saw the flood up issues. Again, I kind of described the pumping issue we have. Water primrose is a constant issue with clogging our waterways. Beavers doing what beavers do, and then just siltation, which again is one of the reasons that we have some of these projects of cleaning out these ditches. Just over time, they silt in. Water primrose, it accelerates that siltation. It traps a bunch of silt in the water, and then it just falls out when the primrose dies. So it basically builds up and diminishes the capacity of the water delivery structure for ditches. So in general, that's the kind of the quick overview of the wildlife area. If anybody's got questions, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Joe. I hope folks now have a better appreciation of how much work it takes to make the wildlife area what it is, and how joyful it is to us. Zane's going to read the questions. If you have some questions, please put them in the chat.
All right, Joe. So number one, can you tell us where the bald eagle nest is?
It's in the south, past where the
Yeah.
public can use. That's right now. That's as much as I'm going to give out.
Yeah, that's
You can't see it at this time because it's actually in the southern area of the general public.
yeah. Do you have to cut back on water use during droughts? And if so, how do you decide what to cut?
So we do, to a degree. Our water rights are the way we get water. I won't say water rights. The way we get water is a little bit different. We try to maximize or not waste any water. So we'll just pick priority areas. We may not put as much summer water out. And there's two reasons. Drought's one of those. Pumping costs is another. Budgets are reality, just like with any other household. It's like I have a budget for the year. My PG&E bills have gone up. So it's a combination of seeing what's the most, and fall flood up, winter water, is the number one priority for us. So we will try to just, pick the areas that are easiest to flood up, that may not have as much fall, so they're more level, so they're not going to waste as much water or use as much water as some of the other units. We go through each year and go through unit by unit what needs work, what we may flood up, what we may dry out that was flooded up, like a permanent pond for several years in a row, but the cattails or tules have come in. Well, that needs to be dried up and disked. So we'll try to combine all that and do a lot of work. Like this summer would be a good time to do a lot of that because we know we're going to have water issues. So we'll dry out some more units that maybe we wouldn't have and try to rework those this summer.
All right. Next up is, what are the plans for the area south of parking lot G?
So that's a pretty broad question, and the plans are just generally how we've operated in the past. Now there's long-term plans that things may change, as we move forward. We have potential impacts from the Fremont Weir Notch project. We're in basically talks with DWR to identify those impacts, how they will impact the wildlife area, and things may change with that, may not. It just depends on exactly what we work out with the Department of Water Resources. But the short term, it's going to be the same, that those areas are closed off, after February or after beginning of hunting season, and then close it off to everybody at the end of waterfowl season, because that's where our active grazing is right now. So there will be, cows on roads at times, calves on road, things like that. Just really not overly conducive to a lot of general use at this point in time. So, that if there's a specific other subset of that question, I could try to answer that, but that's generally where we're at.
Well, the next question is kind of related to that. It says, what can we do as birders to gain access, even if it's just seasonally, such as in summer, to areas that are accessible to hunters during the winter months? While I understand the management challenges related to this, would it be possible to get birder access primarily south of Lot G, as in the last question?
So not as a carte blanche, like, hey, we're just going to open it up and allow access. So we can work on, and I work with the foundation on trying to get special access days and things like that. I'm trying to work with them, establishing some more trails and things, but there are a lot of areas that they're just not going to have the general public out all year, and that's a lot of that is going to be south of G. So specifically what I wanted to try to do was to get more access to the umbrella barn and the vernal pools, because I think that's a really neat area. So, that I think is more doable, because during the summer, the cows don't come in till later. And then early on is when you really want to see the vernal pools anyway. So that lends itself to that. Again, it's going to have to be special days because it's a shared row system with our grazers and private property that's south of there as well. But we can work on, better access or more days for situations like that.
Yeah, that'd be cool. I'd be interested in hearing more about how that could work. Next one says, at one time there was a plan for a separate hunter entrance to the south of the public area. Is that still being considered?
It's still being considered, and it ties into the DWR potential impact and how that affects things. You know, one of the issues with that is that if we did that, it's going to require other private land easement access across other pieces of property. So again, it depends on exactly what we end up with DWR, but nothing's set in stone. I'm not completely opposed. I'm not completely in favor. I'm just going to see what we're going to have to deal with, and then make a decision, you know, based on those facts.
All right, and then the last one, at least that's come in yet, is how much longer will hunting go on here?
Forever.
Yeah.
You know, it pays for, you know, in combination with the leases, you know, that's matched with federal dollars from hunting, you know, firearms and ammunition. So that's the majority, you know, of our budget is tied to that. So when I look at my budget, you know, I can't remember off the top of my head, it's just under $2 million total. Most of that, again, comes from federal dollars matched with state match. So, and then again, we have the lease money in there as well. So it's a combination. The wildlife area, you know, is based a lot of it off of hunting, and that access, it's a limited portion of the wildlife area. So everything's a trade-off.
Yep, that makes sense. A couple more. Are the speed bumps being maintained?
So no, because they're not in there anymore. I lost my tractor operator over a year ago. So I have a part-time person who is able to operate the excavator, which is not running right now. So we hopefully at one point we'll be able to get the speed bumps back in there. I know the first year that they're put in, they're a little big, so we'll work on that. But speeding is an issue. I daily get complaints. People call me, you know, people doing hot laps around the auto tour, doing Brodies in the parking lots, just a lot of general, you know, people going where they're not supposed to be and driving fast, which is really unsafe, especially when I have people, you know, walking around, stop their cars to go look at something, you know, door open, somebody comes through, you know, kicking up dust, car comes behind them, doesn't see somebody. So speed bumps is a possibility if I can refill that position or get my equipment operating. We'll try to make them a little bit lower so they're more passable, but still try to prevent people from speeding.
Sounds good. And then what fish are there and where do people fish?
So one of the most popular areas of fishing is parking lot F. So that's right on the tow drain. The other spot is that whole ditch from parking lot F or drainage structure conveyance system all the way to where the hunter check station is. I've seen people fish along that whole entire stretch. So right by the check station, behind the pumps, you know, all the way to parking lot F. Those are the main places I see people fish. I see people fish at parking lot G a little bit, you know, past the check dam, but 90% is along that stretch between the check station and F.
And then what fish are there?
So, you know, there'll be bass, sometimes stripers. I know people catch catfish. Number one fish is carp is what I see people catch. That's the number one thing that I've saw caught out there.
Nice. And then can you please explain the function of the pollinator areas?
So, you know, it's basically to try to help pollinators, specifically monarch butterflies. So one of the things that I noticed when I first came on is in certain areas, there's not a lot upland. We have a lot of uplands in the south, but not a lot of contiguous or bigger pieces of uplands in the north. So it's a trade-off. I took rice out of production, which is money out of the wildlife area because it's no longer in agricultural production, to try to benefit upland species. At the same time, it happened to be the big push for monarch butterflies. And so if I could benefit, you know, monarch butterfly and upland species at the same time and have it all paid for by outside entities, you know, the dirt work, the planting, it was a win-win situation except for the loss of income. So it is really to help, you know, pollinators that are in dire straits in the state.
Next one's a comment. It says, during COVID, the Yolo Bypass wildlife area was where I often went for horizon therapy. I thoroughly enjoyed all that is available there. Thank you, in all caps. Then another comment. I think there could be a significant win with improvement to shorewood habitat. Uh, and then,
Yeah, I would agree.
what is the status of pheasants in the area?
So, actually our pheasant population is stable to, it's good. It's one of the last remaining wild populations of pheasants in the valley. I think if you look at, and it's tied to the numbers that I have are basically pheasant harvest. And so I think we were just over 300 pheasants last year, which is about 5 years. And so what I think happens is, because we do in the South have large contiguous areas of upland nesting habitat that's not broken up into stuff. We have irrigated pasture, which basically is putting water on the landscape. The chicks are little and they eat insects, and that moisture provides, habitat for insects, and so they benefit from that. But I think it's that combination of large tracts of upland, water on the landscape, and at the same time that we flood, wall to wall every so many years. I think that actually can potentially set back, like skunks and raccoons, which are nest predators. And so it takes them a couple of years to get back up in numbers, and the pheasant population and other ground nesting birds can utilize those times in between, keep their numbers higher. So.
All right, that's cool. And that looks like that's it. So thank you. I think
Awesome,
we'll
thank you.
hand it off to Ken.
Thank you, Zane. Thank you, Joe. Great questions, great responses. Our president, Ann Bryce, was able to make it. Ann, do you have anything you want to say? I guess not.
No, I do. I couldn't get off mute. Oh, and I had the door open to my bathroom. Falling apart.
I don't see it. I don't see it.
Oh, good. No, I just wanted to tell, besides thanking Joe so much, but I also wanted to tell the Audubon members that we try to meet with Joe once a year, and we're a little behind because of COVID. We being Yolo Audubon, SAC Audubon, and Yolo Basin Foundation, and we'll try to get back on that and put out word. And Bart, we can discuss shorebird habitat more and access on a limited basis. Those are things that we can work together to make happen, I'm sure. Thanks, Joe.
Nope, thank you, Ann.
I was talking, my lips were moving. I've just asked if there are no last minute questions, then I think we'll call it a night. And please, everyone, I hope you enjoyed this. I certainly did. Even though I can't say it, we meet with Joe, and I'm out there a lot, and it's good to hear what work they're doing. I know they do a lot of work out there to keep that place functioning, to keep it accessible to the public. And I thoroughly would encourage you to consider buying duck stamps. That would help. And I think it's I think the $25 for the federal stamp, and hopefully if you can afford that, you can do it. I don't know what the state stamp is. I had a hard time finding one. Do better efforts next year, but please consider that. And if you are interested and want to learn more about the area, contact the Yolo Basin Foundation. It serves as the education arm for the wildlife area, and with school programs and public tours. And you'll learn a lot about the area there, some of the inner workings like you heard tonight, and just stay abreast of what's happening out there. And I've worked with the school program over the years, and you see the eyes in a 5-6-year-old when they get it. It's just gonna, for me, it just makes it worth it. It makes the time worth it. So think of different ways you can get involved and support our wetland habitats, and volunteering is one way. So I thank you all for coming tonight. Joe, I really appreciate you taking the time and just telling us about the work that you and your team are doing out there. And it's fantastic.
So Ken, one thing
Absolutely
I want to
fantastic.
say is, and maybe you can put it out, is my email and phone number contact. If you guys got questions or think of stuff, call or email me. It's not going to bother me. That's part of my job, is interacting with people. Doesn't mean you're always going to get, exactly what you want. I get it from every side. But I try to take everybody's, view into consideration when we make decisions. And so if you don't tell me or suggest stuff, then it probably won't happen. But if you explain your reasoning or just ask why, that, again, it's not going to offend me. That's part of my job. And it's probably the funner part of my job is talking to the general people about the wildlife area.
Okay, that's something we can do. We can make that available. We can make that available. Okay. So anyway, thank you, folks. Thank you for being with us tonight. And next month, keep your eye out for the ground rules for the members memories. And we hope that folks will take advantage and attempt to participate. And I look forward to that. So I want to thank you all again and wish you the best rest of the evening you can have. All right. Thanks
Ken.
again, Joe.
Thanks,
Thank you
Ann.
again.
Thanks, everyone.
All righty. Good night, folks.